Alrighty, welcome to episode number 1 of The Upside, or Up and to the Right. We haven't fully fleshed out the name that we want to use for this podcast yet, but we'll hopefully get there. I'm joined today by Dylan Reber, certified financial planning professional, chartered investment manager, certified international wealth manager, and recently portfolio manager. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And it's good to be here.
Yeah, Dylan is obviously a member of Up Financial, big part of the team. Today we are kind of starting right from the beginning in terms of how do you get going with financial planning. We're talking today about rules of thumb, why they may or may not be good, and different types of budgeting and what we recommend as the best way to do budgeting. So, Dylan, without further ado, I guess jumping into things, what exactly is a rule of thumb? What does that mean?
Yeah, a rule of thumb, these are the things that I have problems with. But a rule of thumb, just generally speaking, would be any type of advice where it's not really specific or customized or tailored to a certain situation. It's just sort of like a one-size-fits-all, catch-all solution. The idea being it's simple and easy to follow, so it'll help you, even if it's not perfect, it'll be better than doing nothing.
Yeah. And I like to think of it as, general things that people try to implement that apply to all individuals. Rather than having any kind of specific tailored advice, it's just kind of general advice that applies to everyone, which obviously has inherent problems, right? Because not everything applies to everybody the same.
Yeah, and which is, hinting at my biggest issue with that style of just advice and doing things in general.
For sure. So what are some common rules of thumb that you hear in financial planning?
Most commonly, I hear them in terms of like taking care of the basic stuff. So budgeting is a classic example where you hear them all the time. And the people who espouse these rules of thumbs become very famous and very popular. And that's, I don't like that.
Fair enough. And what's the 50-30-20 rule?
Yeah, so that'd be an example of one of the budgeting rules, probably one of the more prevalent ones, where basically the rule says if you take 50% of your income, your take-home pay should go towards non-discretionary expenses. Non-discretionary expenses meaning things that you can't really choose to spend your money on, right? You kind of have to in order to live.
What would some of those fixed costs be?
Yeah, a classic example would be something like rent or a mortgage, right? Like you can't tell your landlord, hey, I'm supposed to save X amount of my income, so I can only pay half rent today because I'm supposed to pay myself first. That'd be kind of an example of that. Groceries, that's actually another thing we kind of talked about in my class recently. It's difficult to necessarily put everything into a fixed box of discretionary and non-discretionary. For example, groceries, that's a classic example. You could change grocery costs fairly quickly, but it also depends on what's important to you. Are you willing and ready and able to decrease your costs and maybe not shop organic, not shop at a higher end store, go to like Walmart or something to get your groceries, and maybe go like going down the ladder in terms of quality of the food you buy, right? It's fairly easy to change your grocery costs within a range, but
you can't cut out groceries altogether.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
right?
You got to eat.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. And so the 30, so 50% being the fixed expenses, kind of non-discretionary, the 30%, what is that?
Yeah, so those are things, the way that I like to quantify it, it's not that they're things, again, that you can choose to spend money on or not. It's things that are, to help you think of it, it's easier to think of them as things that you can easily change versus things that can't be easily changed.
Sure.
Or like going back to the fixed expenses part or the non-discretionary, you can change your mortgage payment, but it required you to sell your house or refinance your house or do something, a pretty big scale change.
Yeah.
Whereas like a non-discretionary expense would be something like subscriptions to like Disney Plus or Netflix or whatever.
Yeah.
Uber Eats is a classic example, right? That's a very easy thing to cut out.
Not for everyone.
Well, and I was literally just going to say, right, like if you're a working professional, if you're a student, if you're working all the time, right, it's actually maybe not that easy to start cooking.
I mean, in my opinion, I think it is. I think it is easy to cut out, but sometimes you gotta, people you can't pry that Uber Eats out of their cold dead hands, right?
It's tough, right? It does take an adjustment.
Yeah.
Right. So it is kind of hard to split things cleanly into discretionary and non-discretionary, but those would be examples, like classic examples of those two categories.
Cool. So that rule of thumb, 50, 30, what's the other 20?
20% is what you save, right? Save towards your goals, save towards investments, whatever you're saving for.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that 20%, I mean, it could be short term, it could be medium term, it could be long term, but the idea is that you're just not spending that money, right? And investing in various different avenues, I guess.
Well, and to be very clear, like most people who are following these types of rules of thumb are not thinking like that. They're not thinking short term, long term, medium term.
This is true.
Right. They're probably not doing goal planning in the first place, let alone investing differently for different kind of pieces and stuff like that. But that is definitely something you should be doing.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And so, yeah, walk us through why you don't like that rule of thumb. You've already kind of hinted at a few parts, but yeah, run me through why is that bad to just base it on a rule of thumb?
Okay, so for this rule of thumb specifically, right, like the 50-30-20 rule, the reason I don't like that specific rule is just because if you make $1 million per year and you're saving 20% of your income, you're spending a lot of money that you could probably be saving, right? Like you're expending very excessively. At the same time, if you make $50,000 and you're saving, or you're trying to save 20%, that is going to be almost impossible to do, right? And so that's just an example of it. It doesn't take into account the specifics of someone's situation, what your goals are, it doesn't take into account anything. It's just a rule of thumb, and I hate them so much.
For me, I think a lot of it comes down to so much of it is dependent on where you live. And when you think about fixed expenses or where you live and your age. And so when I think about, okay, 50% of your income on fixed expenses, there's a big difference between somebody who, lives on Robson Street in downtown Vancouver, because that's where they are for work or for different things, and the guy living in Estevan, Saskatchewan. Like there's a massive difference there. And to think that you need, 20% you need to save, whether you are 22 years old, fresh out of university, just trying to, get your feet under you, versus like a 50-year-old, whose kids are off to university and their mortgage is mostly paid off, right? Those are massive differences. So how can you, have these rules of thumb? And a lot of times people get, maybe they get a little bit too comfortable because they're like, oh, I'm saving a good percentage of my income, but really based on their age and how little expenses they have, they should actually be saving way more. And maybe that young person shouldn't be beating themselves up so much because they're not saving that, because they're just trying to get going, right?
Not feasible,
And maybe you're better off investing that money into yourself, or kind of setting yourself up so that you can increase your income or do other things. That's kind of one of the reasons I don't like it.
Yeah, and I would agree, because I know eventually we'll address the elephant in the room, is that one of us likes someone who gives rules of thumb and the other really doesn't. Someone who's notorious for rules of thumb advice. But I think that's the nail on the head. And I was thinking, on the way over here, in terms of, why is that really simple rule of thumb advice? Why is it so popular? Why is it so prevalent? And it's exactly because it's so simple and so easy to follow, right? To a certain extent, it probably is better than doing nothing, right?
Sure.
In my opinion, the solution to being stupid with your money isn't further ignorance, and just making really bland, mediocre, middle of the road decisions. It's figure your stuff out, like be specific with what you want to accomplish, have a goal or have goals and have a plan for something. But there is something to be said about the easiness of it, the simplicity.
Yeah. You can wrap your head around. It's easy to understand.
Yeah. It's a good place to start. But yeah, if you are a student, for example, just starting your career, and you're going to have to do some pretty drastic things to try to save 20% of your income, right? And so don't beat yourself up about that. And at the same time, to your point, if you're, just about to hit retirement and you're trying to plug away, some money because maybe you didn't when you were younger, and you're only saving 20%, like you're not going to probably hit your goals.
Yeah. Right. And which comes down to the other piece of, what we prefer is goals-based planning, right? Which is to say, all right, it's actually pretty simple, just based on math, to calculate out, okay, based on somebody's goals, what do they actually need to put away based on their situation, where they live, lifestyle, like all that kind of stuff. And so you can get a lot more specific, which is just a way better way to plan, rather than just having these rules of thumb and then hitting an age and you're like, well, that didn't work, So getting more granular and getting more specific with things, like you said, just so that you have a better understanding of, this is actually what I need to do to get to where I want to be, rather than just following a rule of thumb and hoping it works out.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the point. I mean, that's our job in a nutshell, but the point is you don't have to guess. You don't have to. There will always be anything to do with finance. There will always be projections and assumptions and variables involved, but you can actually do math to figure out, okay, what is the best solution for a given scenario, for a given goal. You don't have to say, well, 20% is good enough for most people in most cases, so fine. You can be like, what do you want to do? Oh, you want to buy an RV? Okay, you want to buy it when? 5 years from now? Okay, and how, take a look at your budget, figure out how much is actually available to save, all right, according to your rate of return you're going to get on your investments, how much you need, by when, accounting for inflation, accounting for tax.
Yep.
Here's what you need to save on a monthly basis. Not everyone can do that math. It's not also that difficult. Like, it's basic time value of money financial math. But
Yep.
The point is you can do math. You
That's
don't
right.
have to guess.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's why, yeah. I don't know how much of a rant you want this to turn into. But
Yeah,
we
no,
can make it
fair
one.
enough. No, I appreciate that. So, and then the second thing we wanted to kind of talk about today was more in terms of budgeting, right? For young people getting into it, and actually maybe I'll take a step back here just to close out on the rule of thumb.
Sure.
You know, if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, I mean, a lot of times what advisors kind of specialize in is getting specific, is getting so that, you know, you're not just basing your life on a rule of thumb, right? When people reach out to us, when they want to come to us, it's because they want to know specifics. It's they want to know, what am I on pace for in terms of retirement? Like, where do I stand right now based on what have I currently put away? And then based on my goals and the things I want to do over the next 5, 10, 20, 30 plus years, right? All those things. What is the gap, right? What do I need to do to be able to hit all those different targets that I have? And maybe you don't perfectly know exactly everything that you want, like the vast majority of people don't, but we can start to kind of plan around it and actually get specific to say, this is how much you need to put towards this. This is how much you need to put towards this. This is the rate of return you need to average in order to get to where you want to go. And so I guess that's just what I want to emphasize. That's the real value I think that comes for one of the real values from an advisor is being able to get granular and set things up properly.
Yeah, it's like the classic thing is if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have a place where you're going, you're going to end up nowhere. And again, it's the idea that you don't have to guess, you don't have to use rules of
Totally.
thumb. And to that, one last piece I kind of want to tack onto that is that, you know, you mentioned that that's the value in working with advisor. That's the thing that I kind of get upset with. One of my biggest issues with the industry as a whole. There's good and bad people in every industry, but I don't know about most or a lot or exactly how many people.
Sure.
But a lot of advisors, more than enough, are relying on rules of thumb, right? All they're doing is just regurgitating rules of thumb that people could easily Google themselves. And it's no wonder why a lot of people are wondering why they even bother paying for advice when they could probably do that level of work themselves.
Sure.
Right? The whole point is that's what an advisor should be doing for you, or a financial planner or whoever is going much more granular, being much more specific, and actually doing the math, right? So that's kind of something to watch out for if you're thinking about it.
Totally. No, that makes perfect sense. And then, the second part today, we want to talk about budgeting. I know people often hate that word, but it's kind of one of those necessities. Like you can't get by in life. People don't become wealthy by accident, right? Very, very, very few people have ever become wealthy by accident, right? Sure, you may win the lottery, sure, you might get inheritance, but oftentimes those people are actually worse off anyways because they don't understand how to budget. Right? And it doesn't have to be this massively restrictive thing. It just, you have to have some kind of a structure or a strategy. So there's obviously a few different types of budgeting out there. What do you like and why?
Before I talk on that, I will say that budgeting, it's a service that I do and that I know a lot of even advisors kind of overlook. Religiously, it is the thing that like my clients least look forward to and then are most appreciative. Like they're like, wow, that is actually so helpful. Like I feel so much more in control of my financial situation and decisions and everything.
Yep.
Just from the simple act of looking at what you're spending money on and coming up with even a rough plan of what you want to spend it on moving forward. And to your point, when you said that, you know, if you don't have that plan, you don't become wealthy by accident. Becoming wealthy is actually, it's really simple, right? I'm not saying it's easy, right? It requires a lot of deferral of gratification and a lot of, being disciplined.
Yep.
But it is very simple. It's literally amount of money saved and invested, rate of return you get, and length of time you invest for. Now, though, two of those things, you have some control over them, right? Like you can influence your rate of return to a certain extent, but you can't just get 100% per year without doing some incredibly drastic things.
Or illegal things.
Yeah, right? You are the age you are, right? And so you can do things like push out retirement, for example, or push out your other goals, but that's usually like a last resort.
Sure, you can choose to get started earlier, but if you haven't, you haven't.
You can't go back in time, right?
Yeah.
So the only thing, or the main one that you have control over is how much you save and invest, right? And, the only kind of two ways to get wealthy, to accumulate wealth, are to follow that basic time value of money equation, compound interest equation, or get lucky, right? You can marry rich, you can get an inheritance, you can win the lottery, you can day trade your way to success, right? There's a lot of ways to get lucky, and it's not, no one's saying that you can't get rich that way, but that's not a strategy, right? Luck isn't a strategy.
Sure.
So that's kind of the strategy is find as much money to save, not necessarily as much money as possible to save, but figure out how much money you need to save for your goals, and then find that money somewhere by budgeting.
Yep, makes sense. And something that we talk about a lot is something called zero-based budgeting. So what is zero-based budgeting, and why do you like it?
Yeah, so in my opinion, that's what budgeting is. All the other ones, the rules of thumb, it's just they're just that. They're just rules of thumb. Budgeting requires a bit more work. It requires you to actually go through your spending habits. We call that cash flow, right? And see, how much money's coming in and how much money's going out, line by line, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be line by line for every individual expense, but you're trying to get as much detail as possible in terms of what you're spending your money on. And zero-based budgeting is essentially trying to target that bottom line figure, which is savings, right? After all of your net income and then all of your expenses come out, what's left after that? Zero-based budgeting is a process of basically going line by line through all those expenses to increase that bottom line target, if it needs to be increased,
sure,
for one thing.
Or to come up with savings at all if you don't have any, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There's something to be said that if the money's sitting in the account, it gets spent, right? So if you don't have that budget and you don't know what you're trying to you don't know what you need to stick to, or you're not automating anything, right? Then the money just it's amazing how it can just get spent.
Yeah, and that's so we'll probably talk, I'm sure, about like budgeting strategies and little tips and tricks to make zero-based budgeting better, more effective. But that's like the general idea with zero-based budgeting is you're just accounting for everything. And I want to preface this for anyone who's watching and thinking to themselves, like, I don't have time for that. I don't want to do that. It really shouldn't take longer than about 15 minutes a month. You should be able to sit down and just kind of go build out your cash flow statement, which again is tracking what happened this past month. And you should be able to kind of input it into your Excel sheet or budget tool, whatever you're using, and it should take about 15 minutes, right? And then you'll get all the information. Did we hit our budget? Did we spend less than we were supposed to? We have more to save. Did we spend more? So we just got to watch that for next month.
And do you there's some people do it by hand, some people do it with an app, right? And do it with software. What do you think about some of these softwares that do that for you?
There's some great ones out there. Like, for example, I'm with TD Bank, and they've got the My Spend app, right?
Yeah.
Very helpful, right? It makes it even easier. It's not even 15 minutes a month because it literally just does it automatically for you. Basically, the big pros and cons to each, you can do, use the apps, right? The ones that'll track your spending automatically. I'm sure there's plenty of like AI assisted ones these days. The advantage with those is it's super easy, right? You basically don't need to put any thought into it. That's also kind of the con is, you should be putting a little bit of thought into these things. That's why I always prefer something where you at least have to input it manually. I obviously I'm an Excel nerd, so I like to use my own Excel spreadsheet that I devised. But even if it's just something where you're writing it in manually, that way you're actually having to write it and be like, wait, I spent how much on Uber Eats this month? And you're the one writing that.
Yep.
That's pretty powerful in and of itself.
And that's exactly what I was going to say, is that there's so much power to actually going through and doing it manually, which is why I actually don't like budgeting apps. I like people to actually go through line by line and actually review what you're spending every month and then write it down. Again, it doesn't take that long, but it forces you to just kind of, I guess, come to reality in terms of this is where my money's actually going, what I'm spending on. And it's almost a bit of a painful, kind of coming to moment of seeing, oh, wow, I really do waste a lot of money in these areas. And it doesn't have to be like you beating yourself up over it. It's just, it allows you to put things into perspective based on what your values are, right? Because a lot of times people spend money on things that they really don't actually value. It's just a habit that they've built. Like a lot of times people don't really value the fact that, okay, I can order meals and it's super convenient, but I'm paying way more for it. But I do value other things. And so it's not even about, getting mad at yourself. It's just saying, okay, I'm going to keep spending money, but I'm going to spend it more on things that actually, I value and that are actually important to me rather than just wasting money all the time.
Yeah, right. This is the classic Starbucks coffee thing, right? Like the $15 coffees a day. That's so much money that you could pay for a pretty nice trip every year by just saving on just make coffee at home and save that money instead.
Yeah.
Right? If that's your priority.
If that's your priority, whereas like I do like a coffee,
Yeah.
every morning, and so I just don't spend that money on other things, but that's something that I value and I spend money on, right? So it's not necessarily about cutting out and saying no, you can't do this or no, you can't do that. It's just based on your own personal value system, and then you put it into the context so that we can say that okay, well, you can't have that value if you literally don't have any money, but if you do have the money, it's cutting out the things that probably don't bring a lot of value to your life.
And that's, that's kind of getting into probably the most important tip or trick, if you will, for budgeting is that it's a matter of prioritization.
Yeah.
There's no, again, this is the problem with rules of thumb. There's no one right answer that fits everyone. The whole point is to come up with a system that works for you specifically. It needs to be something that you can follow. It needs to be something that suits your values, right? So if you're the type of person who you value a nice $15 coffee in the morning.
I mean, maybe not $15.
But hey, like if that's what gives you if that gives you enjoyment, like if you have really rough mornings, you hate waking up, you hate getting yourself to work, and that coffee just makes your day so much better, it means you're going to be able to keep doing that for another 20, 30, 40 years, then that's a well spent $15.
Sure.
But then it just means maybe you need to find something else to cut, something that's a lower priority. Maybe you don't care as much about, goodness, I don't know, coffee.
Having that fancy car, right, and that expensive car payment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just taking control of that, right? And then again, it allows you to put things into perspective, to put things according to your values, right? So again, it's not that we're not saying that you shouldn't spend money on coffee specifically. We're just saying spend money on the things that are important to you, and then reduce your spending on the things that you're like, I could really be doing something better with this money.
Sure.
That's what budgeting is. And that's why, a lot of people don't like budgeting because they see it as a very restrictive process where it's like, you can't spend money on this, you can't spend money on this. And like the classic thing that I get, the biggest piece of resistance I get from people is, well, I want to find the balance between spending today and saving for the future.
Sure.
Totally. That's what budgeting is finding the balance.
Yeah.
A lot of people, when they say that, what they really mean is, I want to spend all my money today and have nothing for the future. That's not balance.
This is true. I could die tomorrow, get hit by a bus. We've heard it all. So, and when we talk about zero-based budgeting specifically, like we've talked about it. Why is it called zero-based budgeting?
That's just a good question, to be honest. I don't know if I know the
it's just
like the
I'll
etymology
answer it then.
of it.
Yeah, ultimately it's because you get to a zero at the end of the day. Every dollar that comes in, right, gets netted out. Sorry, I thought I was teeing you up for an easy knockoff, but yeah, it's just like that. Every dollar is accounted for. It's not like, hey, this is what I'm spending, and anything left I have for savings. It's no. Like savings is a part of the budget. Investing is part of the budget. Like everything is included in the budget at the end. And I know that's exactly what you do.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Good point. I don't know why I kind of blanked on that one, but really that's kind of the, that's the point, right? And this kind of, it goes hand in hand with goal planning too, right? Like there's something to be said for just trying to increase that savings target as much as possible.
Yep.
That's going to help you amass as much wealth as you possibly can. That isn't always the goal, though, right? Like it's not just money for the sake of money.
There are always going to be people in the FIRE community, and I'm definitely not one of them. I want to enjoy my life now and in the future.
Yeah, 100%, right? So that's why the goal planning piece is, like what we were talking about earlier, is so important. Where it's figuring out like how much do you actually need to save at a certain rate of return, so you have the certain amount of money by a certain time to spend on the thing that you want.
Yep.
The service, the good, whatever it might be, the vacation. So basically just zero-based budgeting and goal planning go really hand in hand.
Absolutely.
Definitely two things that are, they're the two very basics of all of financial planning that kind of just get skipped in favor of the more fun stuff.
People want to talk about investments off the bat. They want to talk about rates of return. They want to talk about, those hot topics. You get insurance licensed people, all they want to talk about is insurance, right? Like, I fully agree. And that's why we want to start this very first episode right back to the basics. It may not be the most riveting topic, but it is absolutely so important because winners keep score and you can't measure what you don't track. So that's why I like budgeting. And I know you do that for a ton of our clients and they're all extremely appreciative of it.
Yeah, it's huge. And like to your point, right? When you were saying everyone wants to talk about investments, you don't know how you're supposed to invest until you know what the goals are, right? Like when we're getting back to when you were talking about short, medium, long-term kind of goals. Right, you invest very differently for those types of things because volatility kind of tends to level out over time. But if we're talking about a 2-year timeline where like you want to make a down payment on a new house within 2 years, you probably shouldn't. Again, this isn't investment advice. We're not talking about that, but like you probably, all else equal, should not be investing that in like an aggressive growth kind of strategy.
Totally.
Now you're fully just up to luck, right? Just how do markets do over the next 2 years? It could be really good, it could be really bad.
Yeah, that dream house comes along and it's way down in value because of the fact that the economy is not doing well. But all of a sudden, your investments are now down 30, 40% at the same time. And
Right
now
when
you
you
can't
need
put
it
that
though,
down
right?
payment down, right? So,
Yeah.
yep.
So that's it all ties together. That's the whole thing. Like all of this stuff ties together. The more complex stuff, like retirement planning and tax planning. What account should you be using? Which accounts are going to be more tax efficient? A lot of people just kind of dump money into RSPs without really thinking about it. But one of the key factors in whether or not an RRSP account is the right account to save for is which tax bracket are you going to be in retirement? Which tax bracket are you now? If you're paying less tax now than you are in retirement, you're actually going to be losing money. You're going to be taking a net tax loss for every dollar you contribute to an RSP.
Yep.
So like things like that, and I mean, you could rattle off a list of 100 different things that depend on having a set kind of goals and budget plan, right? How much are you going to save, set aside? Because that'll dictate how much money you'll have in retirement, which will dictate how much money you'll have in retirement for income and what your tax bracket will be. And so then it all comes full circle.
Absolutely. Well said. So in terms of, when you're budgeting, what are some tips and tricks that you like to use that you find are really effective for people that are kind of new to this?
Yeah, so like for actually putting into practice, how to do like a zero-based proper budget. The two probably biggest things that I could think of would be, number one, automating your savings as much as possible. And this is something that's not going to happen right away because a budget is going to be variable. You're not going to hit your spending and saving targets for everything exactly like to the dollar every month. So definitely give yourself a little bit of breathing room to try to get used to budgeting, so that you're not like going into overdraft with your bank account every month kind of thing. But once you have gotten a decent hang of it, try to automate your savings as much as possible, right? Doing like automatic contributions, automatic, deposits, whatever. Because the hardest part of budgeting is not actually the act of sitting down and transcribing how much you spent onto your budget, paper or spreadsheet. The hardest part is going to be sticking to the budget, right? When it's Friday night, you just got paid and you have the choice of putting that money away for something that's 40 years from now, or you have the choice of going out with your friends. So that's going to be the hardest part. So if you can kind of automate that, it takes that decision, out of your hands, or, you kind of don't have a choice anymore.
Totally. If the money's not in the account, it's not getting spent.
Exactly. So automating your savings is a huge one in terms of like actually putting this into practice and making it sustainable. The other thing to make, budgeting sustainable, right, is not to be, necessarily too restrictive. Or on the flip side, think of adding rewards for yourself for following your budget otherwise. So a classic example of this would be adding specific line items, right, in the zero-based budget, adding a certain line item for something like a fun expense or a miscellaneous expense, right? So like, for example, what me and my wife do is we have, we like Costco. Costco's got some cool stuff. So we have $200 per trip, so for about $400 a month that we've allocated just to kind of miscellaneous Costco stuff.
That's a lot of Kirkland slides.
Yeah, like most recently, it was camping chairs. Like they had a really cool like kind of hammock swinging camping chair.
Okay.
Right, and so it's like we go to Costco for our groceries and for our most of our kind of non-discretionary expenses.
Yeah.
And so then we just have that little $200 in there. And I'm kind of upset with my wife right now because she went to Costco today without me, and so I didn't get the chance to pick something fun. But basically, that would be an example of that. Is we go to Costco like, hey, that's a really cool chair. And then and the other thing too is we have a budget for $400 a month or $200 per trip because we go about twice a month.
Okay.
But again, I do not want to make rules of thumb. I'm not saying you should also have a budget of $200 per trip. I'm saying like do what makes sense.
That's what works for you.
Yeah, and the other thing too is we don't necessarily follow that every time. Like it's not like every time we go to Costco we go out of our way to spend $200 more.
Sure.
And then other times, right? Like sometimes the thing we want is like a $500 something or other, right? So it's like as long as we're just over the month to month, year to year, we're spending. We're not excessively spending, for example, in that area. As long as we're kind of roughly hitting that goal, then that's good. Then we're on budget. And it allows you that freedom and that flexibility to be like, hey, I don't have to like literally just go to work, go home, eat my meal plan, like chicken and rice in a Tupperware container that I microwaved, right? Like it doesn't have to be like that. Yeah. You just have to know what you're spending money on and keep track of that.
Yeah, and it's giving yourself that monthly budget to be able to spend guilt-free. right? The amount of that so that you can go out for dinners, you can order, skip the dishes if you want. Like you can do those things. It's just keeping it in a perspective of, okay, I have to keep it under a certain amount, but that allows you to. It actually is freeing for a lot of people knowing that, okay, sweet, I get X number of dollars this month that I can kind of use on whatever I want, and then go do something fun with it.
Yeah, yeah, and you get to like actively choose to spend it on something like, I really want this camping chair, instead of spending like $15 here, $20 there, $10 there, and at the end of the month you're like, where did that $500 go?
Totally.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool.
Now I'm excited to go camping. This is my new comfy chair.
Me too. Well, thank you very much, Dylan, for joining us today. I'm sure you will be back many, many times over this series. And thank you. And to everybody, if you like today's episode, please fire us a message, give us a like. I'm not really too sure how podcasts work in terms of how they work. Can you like them? I don't know how that works, but share us, give us your feedback. We'd love to hear more. If you have certain episodes that you want us to cover, different financial planning concepts, we're going to start from the basics and build through, but we would love to hear what you guys want to hear about.
And we're not going to give rules of thumb. But no, thanks for having me. It was great. It's awesome to kind of get the chance to sit down and explain these things a bit more in depth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right on, man. Thanks.
Cheers.